The afternoon sun slanted through the tall oaks lining Maple Street, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. School had just let out, and the usual wave of students spilled onto the curb, backpacks slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling, laughter mixing with the distant hum of traffic. Among them was a girl who moved differently, not faster or slower, just quieter, like she carried her own kind of rhythm. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She simply walked with her eyes forward, fingers tracing the edge of a worn sketchbook tucked under her arm. She'd been taking the same bus home for over a year now, the number 14, blue and slightly dented near the back wheel. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable, and it stopped right outside Jefferson High. Every day she boarded, swiped her student pass, and made her way to the third seat from the back on the right side, the one by the window. It wasn't assigned. No one had claimed it officially, but in the unspoken language of routine, it was hers. She'd sit there, press her forehead gently against the cool glass, and watch the world blur past. Laundromats, corner stores, kids chasing each other down driveways, stray cats sunning themselves on porch steps. Sometimes she'd pull out her sketchbook and draw what she saw: the curve of a fire hydrant, the tilt of a mailbox, the way sunlight hit a puddle after rain. These small things grounded her. They reminded her that even on hard days, beauty still showed up, quiet, unannounced, but there. Today had been one of those days. Not terrible, not great, just heavy. Third period chemistry had been confusing again, and she'd stayed after class to ask questions, only to be met with a rushed, "figure it out," from the teacher. At lunch, she'd sat alone as usual, under the big oak near the track field. She didn't mind solitude, but sometimes it felt less like a choice and more like something that just happened, because no one ever asked her to join. Still, she kept her head down, ate her sandwich, and sketched the outline of a bird perched on the fence. By the final bell, she was tired, not in the sleepy way, but in the way that made her shoulders feel like they carried extra weight. Now, standing at the bus stop, she adjusted her bag and waited. The number 14 pulled up with a soft hiss of brakes and a puff of exhaust. The doors opened and she stepped on, nodding briefly to the driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a coffee stain on his uniform shirt who always gave her a small wave. She swiped her pass, heard the familiar beep, and walked down the aisle. The bus wasn't full yet, but it was filling fast. A group of freshmen giggled near the front. Two boys argued playfully over a video game. Near the middle, a girl scrolled through her phone, earbuds in, lost in her own world. She reached her seat. Empty, just like always. She slid in, placed her sketchbook on her lap, and leaned her head against the window. Outside, the school faded into the background as the bus pulled away from the curb. She let out a slow breath. This was her favorite part of the day, the in-between time when school was behind her and home wasn't quite here yet. No expectations, no pretending, just motion and quiet. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. Earlier that day, she'd noticed something new on her walk to class, a mural someone had painted on the side of the old bike shop downtown. Bright colors, bold lines, a phoenix rising from flames made of books and musical notes. She'd taken a mental picture of it, and now she tried to recreate it from memory. Her pencil moved slowly, carefully. She wasn't trying to make it perfect, just true. Every line was a way of saying, "I saw this." It mattered. Around her, the bus filled with the usual sounds: chatter, the occasional burst of laughter, the low rumble of the engine. She didn't tune it all out. She just let it exist around her like background music. She wasn't ignoring people. She just needed this small space to breathe. And in that seat, she found it. Then the bus stopped again, 2 blocks down. The doors opened with a sigh. Footsteps climbed aboard, louder this time, heavier. She didn't look up, but she felt the shift in the air. The easy hum of the ride tightened, like a string pulled too taut. A few students near the front suddenly went quiet. Someone quickly stuffed their phone into their pocket. She kept drawing, but her hand slowed. She didn't need to see him to know who it was. His voice cut through the cabin like a blade, loud, sharp, dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from never being told no. "Yo, move," she didn't react at first. Maybe he wasn't talking to her. Maybe it was someone else. But then he said it again, closer this time, and she felt the shadow fall over her seat. "Hey." I said move. She lifted her eyes slowly. Standing in the aisle was a tall senior, broad-shouldered, wearing a varsity jacket even though football season was long over. He had that look, chin up, chest out, like the whole world owed him space. Behind him, two of his friends hovered, smirking, waiting to see what would happen. He pointed at her seat. "That's mine," she blinked. "I've been sitting here all year," he scoffed. "Not anymore." A few kids glanced over. Most looked away quickly. No one spoke. The bus driver kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel a little tighter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She just looked at him steady and said, "I was here first." For a second he seemed surprised, like he hadn't expected her to answer at all, let alone so calmly. Then his expression hardened. He took a step closer, looming over her. "You really want to do this?" She didn't flinch. She closed her sketchbook gently and held it against her chest like a shield. Not out of fear, but because it was hers. And she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel small for holding on to what was hers. Outside, the bus rolled past the park, where kids were still playing basketball under the fading light. Inside, the air felt thick, charged. Something was about to change. Not just for her, but for everyone watching, and it all started with a seat. Document ends. The bus rolled forward, tires humming over the pavement, but inside, time seemed to slow. The senior stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He'd said it twice now, move, and yet the girl in the window seat hadn't budged. Not even a flinch. That alone threw him off. Usually people backed down fast. A sharp word, a hard look, and they'd shuffle away, eyes down, muttering apologies for something they hadn't even done wrong. But this one? She just sat there, calm as morning dew, holding that sketchbook like it was part of her. He glanced at his friends behind him. They were watching, waiting for him to handle it, like always. He couldn't afford to look weak, not here. Not in front of half the school. So he leaned in, voice low but sharp. "You deaf or something?" I said, "Get up." She looked up at him, not with anger, not with fear, just with this quiet kind of clarity, like she saw right through the act. "I heard you," she said, "but I was here first. That doesn't change just because you showed up late." A few kids near the front exchanged glances. One girl pulled out her phone, not to record yet, but just to have it ready, like she sensed something was about to happen. The bus driver kept driving, but his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror more than usual. The senior straightened up, trying to regain control. He forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Man, you really think this seat's yours? You don't even talk to anybody. You just sit here like a ghost. What's the big deal?" She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window for a second. At the laundromat they were passing, the neon open sign flickering, an old man sweeping the sidewalk. Then she turned back. "It's not about the seat," she said softly. "It's about respect. You don't get to walk in and take what someone's already using just because you feel like it." That word, respect, hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Everyone heard it. And for a moment, even the senior seemed to hesitate. But then his pride kicked back in louder than reason. "Respect?" he sneered. "You think you deserve respect just for sitting there doing nothing?" She didn't rise to the bait. "I think everyone deserves basic decency. Even you." That threw him. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Like he was human, not just a force to be feared. He shifted his weight, glanced at his friends again. One of them muttered, "Just sit somewhere else, man," but the senior ignored him. Backing down now would mean admitting she was right. And that wasn't an option in his world. So he reached for her bag, which was resting on the empty half of the seat. "Fine, if you won't move, I'll move your stuff." Her hand shot out, not fast, not aggressive, but firm, and covered the strap of her bag. "Don't touch it," he froze. Their eyes locked. For the first time he saw something in hers that he hadn't expected. Not defiance exactly, but resolve. Like she'd made a decision long before he ever stepped on the bus, and nothing he said or did was going to shake it. "You really gonna cause a scene over a seat?" he asked, voice lower now, almost pleading, but not quite. "I'm not causing anything," she said. "You are." Behind them, a freshman whispered, "She's not wrong." Just loud enough for a few to hear. Someone else nodded. The energy on the bus had shifted. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about who got to take up space and who got pushed aside without a second thought. The senior pulled his hand back slowly, like he'd touched something hot. He stood there, caught between his reputation and the sudden uncomfortable feeling that maybe, just maybe, He was the one in the wrong. But he couldn't say that, not here. Not now, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He doubled down. "Whatever," he spat. "You're not worth it." But as he turned to walk away, his steps were heavier than before. He didn't go to the back like he usually did. He sat in the first empty seat he found, 2 rows up, near the aisle, and slumped into it, arms crossed, staring out the window like he hadn't just been handed a quiet lesson in humility. The tension didn't vanish, but it loosened. Kids started talking again, softly at first, then louder. A few glanced back at the girl in the window seat. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with something closer to admiration. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even raised her voice. She just held her ground, plain and simple. She opened her sketchbook again, but she didn't draw. She just held it, fingers resting on the page. Her heart was still beating fast, but not from fear, from something else. Something like clarity. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't wanted a confrontation, but she also knew deep down that if she'd moved, she'd be giving away more than a seat. She'd be saying it was okay to be treated like she didn't matter, and she did matter. Not because of what she wore or who she knew or how loud she talked, but because she existed. And that was enough. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. The bus passed the grocery store, the post office, the little library with its brick steps and flower boxes. Life kept going, but inside that bus something had changed. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. A few stops later, the senior got off without looking back. His friends followed, quieter than usual. No jokes, no shoving, just silence. When the girl's stop came, she stood, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked to the front. The driver gave her that same small nod. She stepped off onto the sidewalk, the cool evening air brushing her face. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel angry. She just felt steady. As she walked home, sketchbook tucked under her arm, she thought about how small moments could ripple outward in ways you never expected. She hadn't set out to make a statement. She just wanted to ride home in peace, but sometimes peace is the loudest thing of all. Document ends. By the next morning, the story was already moving. Quietly at first, like a ripple spreading across a pond. It didn't start with headlines or dramatic announcements. It began in hushed conversations between lockers, in group chats lighting up before first period, in the way a few students glanced toward the back of the cafeteria and nodded like they'd just remembered something important. Someone had recorded part of what happened on the bus, not the whole thing, just the moment when the girl held onto her bag and said, "Don't touch it." That short clip, barely 20 seconds long, had been shared a dozen times before homeroom even started. But it wasn't the video that mattered most. It was what it reminded people of. How many times had they stayed quiet when someone pushed too hard? How many times had they given up their seat, their lunch spot, their voice, just to avoid trouble? Watching her sit there calm and unmoved made them feel something they hadn't in a long time, possibility. Maybe things didn't have to stay the way they were. She didn't know any of this when she walked into school. She wore the same hoodie she always did, the one with the frayed cuffs, and kept her eyes on the floor like usual. She wasn't looking for attention. She just wanted to get through the day without drama. But as she passed the main hallway, a few kids she barely knew gave her small smiles. One girl whispered, "You good?" as they crossed paths near the water fountain. She nodded, surprised but not unkind. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good." Meanwhile, the senior, the one who'd demanded the seat, was having a very different morning. He walked in late, shoulders hunched, eyes darting like he expected someone to call him out. His usual swagger was gone. He didn't sit with his crew at lunch. Instead, he hovered near the edge of the courtyard, eating alone, scrolling through his phone with a frown. He'd seen the clip too. Not because someone sent it to him. He'd overheard 2 freshmen talking about it in the bathroom. He didn't watch it. He didn't need to. He remembered every second. What stuck with him wasn't her words exactly. It was the way she looked at him, like he wasn't a monster, but like he was capable of better. And that was harder to ignore than any insult. By third period, a teacher pulled him aside after class. Not to scold him, not exactly, but to ask, "You okay? You seem off." He shrugged, mumbled something about sleep, but the teacher didn't push. Just gave him a look that said, "I saw what happened. Let's talk if you need to." He walked away feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Back in the art room, the girl sat at her usual table, pencil in hand. She wasn't drawing the mural anymore. Today, she sketched the inside of the bus, the curve of the window, the pattern of the seats, the way light fell across the aisle. She didn't include faces. She didn't need to. The story was in the space between people, in the silence that followed a single act of courage. At lunch, something unexpected happened. A sophomore she'd never spoken to before slid into the seat across from her under the oak tree. "Mind if I sit here?" the girl asked, holding a brown paper bag. She shook her head. "Go ahead." They didn't talk much, just shared a quiet meal, the kind where silence feels comfortable, not awkward. By the end, the sophomore said, "Thanks for not moving." She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "On the bus," the girl said. "It made me feel like maybe I don't have to keep letting people walk over me either." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't about her anymore. It never really was. Later that afternoon, the school counselor posted a notice on the bulletin board. "Respect Circle. Open discussion. Room 214. Thursday after school." No names mentioned. No blame assigned. Just an invitation to talk about how people treat each other in shared spaces. Hallways, buses, lunchrooms, locker rooms. A few students paused to read it. Some rolled their eyes, but others took a picture with their phones. One even circled the date in their planner. That evening, as the number 14 pulled up to the stop, she hesitated before stepping on. Part of her wondered if things would be different now. If someone would say something, if the senior would be there, if the air would still feel charged. But when she boarded, it was just another ride. The driver gave her the same nod. She walked to her seat. It was empty. She sat down, placed her sketchbook on her lap, and leaned her head against the glass. Halfway home, the bus stopped and the senior got on. He didn't look at her. Didn't say anything. He just walked to the back and sat alone, staring out the window. She didn't expect an apology. She didn't need one. But when he got off at his stop, he paused for a second near the door like he wanted to say something. He didn't, but he didn't swagger either. He just stepped off, shoulders a little less stiff than before. The next day, a freshman boy held the door open for a teacher without being asked. A group of girls let a shy classmate join their lunch table without making her beg for it. Small things, quiet things, but they added up. She noticed them. Not because she was looking for credit, but because she finally understood. Standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it just means staying put, and sometimes that's enough to remind others that they, too, deserve to take up space. By Friday, the buzz had settled, but the change hadn't. People still talked about the bus, but not like it was gossip. More like it was a turning point they were all trying to understand. Even the teachers seemed more aware, watching the hallways with sharper eyes, stepping in sooner when voices got too sharp or hands got too pushy. She never posted the video. Never gave interviews. Never made a speech. She just kept showing up. On the bus, in class, under that oak tree at lunch. And in doing so, she became something rare. Not a hero, not a symbol, but a reminder. A quiet, steady reminder that dignity doesn't need volume to be real. And sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to move for the whole room, or bus, or school, to start seeing things differently. Document ends. The week after the bus incident, something unusual happened in the school's main office. A stack of handwritten notes started appearing on the counselor's desk. Not complaints, not reports, just notes. One read, "I let someone take my lunch spot again yesterday. I'm tired of doing that." Another said, "He shoved me in the hallway last year and I never told anyone. I think I'm ready to now." A third simply asked, "Can we talk about what respect really looks like?" No names were signed, but the counselor knew where they came from. They came from kids who'd spent years swallowing their discomfort, thinking it was just part of growing up. Now something had shifted. It wasn't that one moment on the bus had magically fixed everything, it hadn't. But it had cracked open a door that most students didn't even realize was closed. And through that crack, a little light got in. The girl didn't know about the notes. She wasn't part of any official conversation, and no adult had pulled her aside to praise her or make her the face of some new school campaign. She was just there, still sketching, still quiet, still taking the same seat on the number 14 every afternoon. But people saw her differently now. Not as someone to ignore, but as someone who'd shown them what it looked like to hold your ground without losing your humanity. Teachers began noticing changes too. In history class, a usually silent student raised their hand to challenge a point the teacher made. Not rudely, but thoughtfully. In gym, a group of boys stopped mocking a classmate for not being fast enough and instead offered to run with them. These weren't grand gestures. They were small, everyday choices, but they added up. And they all seemed to trace back in some quiet way to that moment on the bus when one person said, "No, not today." Even the bus itself felt different. The driver started greeting more students by name. Kids who used to sit alone now had someone next to them, not always talking, but just sharing space without fear. And the senior? He still rode the bus, but he kept to himself now. He didn't strut down the aisle like he owned it. He didn't bark orders or shove past younger kids. He just sat, sometimes near the back, sometimes near the middle, and stared out the window like he was thinking about something heavy. One afternoon, he got on the bus and saw the girl already in her seat. He paused for a second, then walked past without a word. But this time, when he sat down, he didn't slouch like he was mad at the world. He sat up straighter, like he was trying. A few days later, during lunch, a group of juniors gathered near the courtyard benches and started talking, not gossiping, but really talking, about how certain students always seemed to get away with being rude just because they were loud or popular. One of them said, "Why do we let that happen?" Another replied, "Because no one ever says stop." And then someone else, quieter but firm, added, "Well, someone did." That someone never asked to be part of the conversation. She was sitting under her tree, sketching the way the leaves moved in the wind, unaware that her simple act of staying put had sparked something much bigger than she ever imagined. The school didn't hold an assembly. There was no dramatic confrontation in the hallway. But slowly, quietly, the culture began to shift. Kids started checking in on each other. If someone was being pushed around, even just with words, others would step in, not with fists or shouting, but with presence. A hand on a shoulder, a calm, "Hey, that's not cool," a simple, "You okay?" asked with real concern. Even the teachers changed. They started paying attention to the quiet kids, the ones who never caused trouble but also never got noticed. They made space for them in class discussions. They asked how their day was going and actually waited for an answer. It wasn't perfect. Old habits didn't vanish overnight. But the air felt lighter, like everyone had permission to breathe a little easier. One Thursday after school, the respect circle met for the first time. About 15 students showed up. Some because they'd been hurt, some because they'd done the hurting, and some just because they wanted to understand. The counselor didn't lead with rules or lectures. She just asked, "What does respect feel like to you?" A freshman said, "It feels like being seen." A senior said, "It feels like not having to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable." Someone else said, "It feels like safety." No one mentioned the bus directly, but everyone knew it was the reason they were all sitting in that room together. Meanwhile, the girl walked home like she always did, sketchbook under her arm, earbuds in but not playing music, just there for comfort. She passed the mural downtown again, the one with the phoenix rising from books and music notes. This time she noticed something new. Someone had added a small detail at the bottom, a single chair drawn in faint pencil facing the sunrise. She smiled just a little. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it meant everything. Back at school the next day, a teacher left a note in her mailbox, not an official one, just a folded piece of lined paper. It read, "Thank you for reminding us that courage doesn't always roar." She tucked it into her sketchbook and didn't tell anyone. But she kept it. She still didn't want attention. She never had. But she was starting to understand that sometimes doing the right thing, even something as small as staying in your seat, was never really just about you. It was about everyone watching, everyone waiting for someone to show them it was okay to stand tall. And in that quiet, steady way, change kept growing, not with fireworks, but with footsteps. One after another, all heading in the same direction. Document ends. Weeks passed and the days settled into a new kind of rhythm. The buzz around the bus incident had faded, not because people forgot, but because it had become part of the fabric of the school now, like a thread woven quietly into something stronger. The girl still took the number 14 every afternoon, still sat in the same window seat, still sketched the world as it moved past her. But now when she boarded, a few students would nod. Sometimes someone would sit nearby, not crowding her, not making a show of it, just sharing the space like it belonged to all of them equally. She never asked for that. She didn't expect it, but she didn't push it away either. She'd learned that connection didn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrived in silence, in small gestures. A held door, a shared smile, a seat offered without being asked. The senior who'd once demanded her spot hadn't spoken to her directly since that day. But he'd changed in ways that didn't need words. He no longer walked through the halls like he owned them. He held the cafeteria line door open for underclassmen. Once, he even picked up a dropped notebook and handed it back without a smirk or a comment. People noticed, not because he announced it, but because the absence of his usual swagger was louder than any apology could have been. One rainy Tuesday, the bus was more crowded than usual. A freshman stood near the front, soaked from the downpour, clutching a soggy backpack. The girl looked up, then stood without a word and offered her seat. The freshman hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Go ahead." It wasn't about giving in. It was about choosing when to give. And that made all the difference. She stood for the rest of the ride, holding onto the overhead rail, watching raindrops race down the window. No one tried to take her place. No one acted like it was strange. It was just a normal thing, someone helping someone else. And maybe that was the real victory. Not that she'd refused to move that one time, but that now, kindness didn't feel like an exception. It felt like the new normal. At school, the respect circle kept meeting. Attendance grew slowly, not in big leaps, but steady ones. Students came not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to be part of something that felt honest. They talked about boundaries, about listening, about how power isn't always loud. It's often quiet, and it shows up in who gets to speak, who gets heard, and who gets to sit where without being questioned. Teachers started weaving those conversations into class time, not as lectures, but as questions. What does fairness look like in this situation? How would you want to be treated if you were in their shoes? Kids answered more openly now. They weren't afraid to say, "That doesn't feel right," or "I think we can do better." Even the bus driver seemed different. He'd started saying good morning to more students by name. He kept an eye on the back rows, not with suspicion, but with care. One afternoon, when two boys got too rowdy near the back, he didn't yell. He just pulled over, turned slightly in his seat, and said calmly, "We all deserve a safe ride home. Let's keep it respectful." They quieted down right away. No drama, no escalation. Just a reminder delivered with dignity. The girl never became a spokesperson or a poster child for anything. She wasn't interviewed for the school paper. She didn't lead any clubs. She just kept showing up as herself. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that change doesn't always need a spotlight. Sometimes it grows in the corners and the quiet choices people make when no one's watching. One afternoon, as she walked past the downtown mural, she saw a small crowd gathered. A local artist was adding to it, painting a row of bus windows along the bottom edge. In one of them, a figure sat by the glass, sketchbook open, head turned toward the light. It wasn't detailed. It wasn't labeled. But she knew. She stood there for a long moment, rain misting her hair, and felt something warm rise in her chest. Not pride exactly, but peace. Like she belonged in the story, not as a hero, but as someone who'd simply done what felt right. Back at school, things weren't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still kids who struggled, still days when the weight of the world felt heavy. But there was also more laughter in the hallways. More eye contact. More "you good?" "Send need help?" tossed around like they were ordinary. And maybe that was the point, making decency ordinary. She thought about that a lot as she rode home one evening, the sky painted in soft pinks and golds. She wasn't trying to change the world. She never had been. She just wanted to go home without being told she didn't deserve her seat. And in standing her ground, she'd given others permission to claim their space too, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. Her mom noticed the change before she did. "You seem lighter," she said one night over dinner. The girl shrugged. "Things just feel clearer." Her mom smiled like she understood more than she let on. As the school year wound down, the Respect Circle organized a small event. Not a protest, not a performance. Just a gathering in the courtyard with music, poetry, and student art. The girl didn't read or perform. She just sat on the grass, sketching the scene, hands passing out lemonade, feet tapping to a guitar, faces turned toward each other in real conversation. She drew it all, the joy, the awkwardness, the hope, because it was real. And real things mattered. On the last day of school, she boarded the number 14 for the final time that year. The bus was quieter than usual. Summer break hung in the air like a promise. She took her seat. The senior got on a few stops later. He saw her, hesitated, then walked back and sat across the aisle. Not close, not far, just there. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod. She returned it. No words needed. As the bus rolled toward her stop, she looked out the window at the familiar streets, the laundromat, the library, the bike shop with its bright mural. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. She stepped off, backpack light without textbooks, sketchbook tucked under her arm. The sun was warm on her skin. She walked home slowly, not in a hurry. She didn't know what next year would bring. But she knew this: she wouldn't shrink. She wouldn't hide. And she wouldn't give up her seat, not because she wanted to win, but because she knew her worth didn't depend on someone else's permission. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Document ends.